We do it in Microsoft Teams, and if you have some discussion about Microsoft Teams, Bill is the right person to do this. But that's a bit of a joke I have to make. In that case. Yes, you did it already. That's the one thing. What the form of the setup is more or less, we have a bit of a starting dialogue. I will do it and start with Bill. If you have some comments, questions, please write it in the chat. I try to take it up, and then we have a more open dialogue at the end or in between. Let's see how it goes. We will make it happen. I think quite a lot of people are interested in that, and we have to manage the order or just the aspects which are coming in. I would like to ask Michael Wiesmüller to have a short have some introductory words. Michael Wiesmüller is the head of department of key enabling technologies for industrial innovation that's the long title is Federal Ministry of Climate Action. I hope I do it right. Environment, energy, mobility, innovation, and technology. But Michael, you can also say it in more precise words what the ministry is doing, and probably a short intro to the goals of the COVID pop-up hub, which we do together.
Okay, thanks a lot, Manfred. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I will be very short since I think my connection is not very good. I'm routed through the server of my ministry, and which seems not to be very strong. So I make it short and leave much time for the discussion. Let me first thanks again, Bill, for joining us. Well, this time you didn't have to take a flight. But use those tools. But it's very much appreciated to have this kind of discussion. Just a short comment what this whole thing is about. We started this what we call the COVID pop-up hub of our ministry approximately in May last year, at the moment when things were really very dark and scary and well unforeseeable what will happen. Mainly with the idea to use this time of these dark times in creating a framework where we can discuss about the outcome and the impact of the crisis, and try to get orientations about the main I would say disruptive elements this pandemic brings with this. The main one of the motivations was to catch up as early as possible those momentums of change at an early stage, which will affect our technology discussions that we have here at the ministry. We have a lot of topics that we address. We are still a little bit, I would say, fighting with the scaling of the questions that we have on the table. But at the end of the day, it's about agenda setting. It's about agenda setting for our programs, for our policies, for the way we approach the big questions. And distancing is, I think, one of the first topics that came to our mind. I mean, the digital world is all about networking. If you have these first associations about digital tools, it's about networks, it's about connections, it's about bringing people together. And now we have this incredible strong demand for distancing in all areas. We're talking about distancing of people, of friends, of working environments, even of states, of regions, of continents. And it was a little bit the kind of interaction with Manfred and his team, trying to bring up kind of discussion. What does distancing in a technology environment mean? What could it mean for our agenda, for our topics, for our programs? We already had some very interesting discussions about this. I'm very much looking forward into the talk today, what it will bring. Well, our perspective is to have a kind of first action at the second half of this year, which should reflect stronger than we could so far reflect on the outcomes of our discussions. By this, I hand over to Manfred. Very much looking forward to the discussion. Thanks again, Bill, for coming. And now the floor is yours. I'm listening.
So thank you, Michael, to give this short intro. So I think we are quite definitely every discussion flows into the all the different aspects we have here. So I will go over to the dialogue and the conversation. So first, I think most of you or some of you know Bill. I just give a short intro based on the bio, which you probably have seen. So Bill has a 45, and I like this sentence of your bio, a 45-year romance with human aspects of technology. I like that. It's definitely a way how you see the whole world of technology and human-centered technology development. We had some discussion in the beginning. You have a long 20 years career as a musician, and that are quite some roots also to Austria, which we learned in the pre-discussion we had. And then you morphed into a researcher and action designer. You have at the University of Toronto, at Xerox PARC, in particular at Xerox PARC, you did quite a lot of very interesting and challenging things, which also had to do with remote technology type of things, and we probably can come up to that anyway a bit, because some roots of the technology we are using here, in particular MS Teams or things like that, probably have been born sometimes in the very in several years ago in that case. But how we stand at the moment, where we are at the moment in that case, I think you are. If you have some quite a lot of things you did in the past, in particular at Alias Research and SGI, and now at Microsoft, and I think you are definitely, that's my I would say one of the key persons in the area of human-computer interaction, in particular bridging science, bridging interdisciplinarity, and also bridging into industry and industry perspectives. In that case, I think you do quite a lot, and there's still a lot to do as we discussed before. So thank you again for joining this discussion and joining this conversation. And let's start on that. So I would just open it by a very easy question in that case. And the easy question is, if we take this topic of closer apart, which we selected for the title of the conversation, where we really stand at the moment, where we are at the moment, how good technology is at the moment, what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong in that case. So what are your perspective at the moment after this quite a lot of different things you did in the past?
So I like the title "Close Apart," or I think you said "closer apart," or is it "close apart"?
I said "closer apart."
I think we should drop the ER and then have a hyphen with a little arrow going both ways, because it's really interesting that in many ways, well, I'll start this way. The thing I repeat the most often is everything is best for something and worst for something else. The second thing that underlies everything I'm going to say is one thing from one of my heroes, a historian of technology named Melvin Kranzberg, who has 7 laws, but I'll just tell you the first and maybe the second law. And his first law is that technology is not good, it is not bad, but nor is it neutral. It will be some combination of the two. And since if you believe that firmly, then logic says when you use the words good and bad, you must have some kind of moral compass, some kind of value system according to which you measure good and bad. And you also have to, by taking inwardly that law, to understand that you have an obligation to pay attention and prospect for the positives and the negatives. And and make informed decisions therefrom. And I'll just give you the second law. I am going to answer your question, by the way. But the second law is, and I love this because in English it's a very good Wortspiel, wordplay. It says, invention is the mother of necessity, as opposed to necessity is the mother of invention. Because of the first law, you will get things wrong. And having put that out, you have an obligation to fix what you got wrong and take responsibility for it without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Without losing that which was good. So coming back to this notion of close and apart, I love that. And when you first told it to me, because it plays with this oscillation between technology can pull us apart, it can isolate us, you're just locked in screens, you don't see the world. And yet it lets me be the very same technology that's from the same screen, the same device, the same operating system. It lets me be in many places at once. But actually, I'm not in many places. If the technology is right, and if we reach its full potential, we are, in all intents and purposes, not just mentally or psychologically or whatever, we are in the same place. And that's where we still have some work to do, because I'm only seeing you and I can't look at somebody in the audience and see one of the other attendees and measure them or talk to them directly. But that's the dream. That's where we want to go. So it's not that we're going from apart to together or close when we're apart or apart when we're close. The answer to all questions is yes, or it depends. And then the question is why? On what does it depend? And those are all the decisions that help us land on the right part of the teeter-totter of values that comes out in Kranzberg's first law. And that's why the social and cultural literacy and awareness, so the ethical awareness, is so important. Every single technological decision we make is at the right level of abstraction is an ethical decision. And yet the people because it's very difficult to be a good designer, a good engineer, there's no time to emphasize even how to think about the ethics and the long and short-term impacts of what we build. And so we have to account for that. We can talk some more about how one might approach that or do that, because it's not crazy talk. It's just another way of how we design our own culture of even the technology, what we consider technology workers.
Are we good enough in doing this?
No, terrible. No, listen. I'm an optimist. I'm going to be 72 in a month, right? And I still am more optimistic and enthusiastic than I was when I was, in my 20s. But I also see but it's too important not to be optimistic. So I think the state of technology right now is, compared to what was there before, there's all these miracles that we can do this, like in terms of bandwidth. But I think from the conceptual point, we're at least 10 to 20 years behind where we could or should be, because we are so bad at this. And it's not the technology's fault. And I would also say that in some ways you could argue that never has the gap between what the hardware can deliver versus what the software enables has maybe never been so wide. And all of this is due to predictable aspects of human nature and how we approach technological evolution and how we evolve as societies. But my hope and the biggest resource I think around this is that helps drive me and gives me optimism is I also know that anything that's going to have large impact in the next 5 years is already at least 15 years old. And so it's not that we're not good technicians, and we're not good designers. We're just not good historians, and we're not good cultural historians, and we're not that good organizational design. And by the way, we're human. And we have to acknowledge that. And as soon as you understand, as a society or as an individual or as a working team, that you're human, you're not perfect, then, but you know why, then you can take and use your intellect and your skills to figure out how do we reorganize ourselves so that we can address some of those weaknesses and make faster progress in terms of innovation. I think these things can be taught. The technology is sitting there hidden in plain view. And Marcel Proust has this great line, right? The only true voyage of discovery is not to go to different places, but simply to see through different eyes. And so the most important thing I can contribute today, and what I hope we can do here, is collectively bring about a renaissance in thinking in terms of seeing with different optics, and then the answers are in plain view. My definition of the act of creativity is this: creativity is the act of making the obvious obvious before it's obvious. And I mean it very seriously, but I also like playing, because you can't, these things are too important to take seriously. Without play and without agility of mind, we'll get bogged down in the mud. But the best ideas are the ones we say, if you want to bring a culture, a society, a team, a company to move forward faster, and that's the problem. People are quite rightly nervous about rapid paces of change without thought. But if we can frame things in a way where we just say, oh, it's just like what we've been doing before, it's just this little change. It's a small incremental step, no problem, it's good, fine. But when you take that little step, it takes you into a completely new world that you discover, but you didn't hesitate to take that step because you understood the framing. And so we don't have to have these great big disruptive steps to go into a different world. If we understand it's not good enough to have a great future vision and where we are now, but rather say, what are the stepping stones, incremental, that were within everybody's tolerance that will get us from here to there? Otherwise, if it's just a future vision, you're doing art, you're not doing science, you're not doing technology. It's lovely, it's neat, it's aspirational, but it doesn't help us very much. The true work comes in how do I get from here to there? Building upon the hard-won existing skills. And so the investment, the return on the investment is huge, but it's not because I taught you, it's because you discovered it itself. I was just the guide who led you to that step that you took comfortably. And this is just from mountaineering, right? It takes somebody into the mountains. You don't want to scare the hell out of them. You want to take them so they're just overwhelmed by the beauty and they want to get up there more. And you know, and they're not scared to death. And it's just the same in this. Let's call it the Austrian approach.
So in terms of Renaissance, you mentioned about you talked about Renaissance. I think you worked quite a lot in these technologies and human-centered thinking of remote technology, of video technology, media spaces, meeting spaces, several years ago. What would like to have nowadays from the insights you had these times when you worked in these media spaces activities several years ago? What we would like to have, what should we have from that research? What you did at that time, in terms of virtual meeting places or connectedness in some way. So there's quite a lot which still not happened in technology development or in this type of MS Teams at all this type of video conferencing systems.
Okay, so just make if I lose you where I'm going, I sometimes lose myself, so I have to make an anchor point so I don't lose my train. So I want to touch quickly about Renaissance. And this comes down to a way of how we as a group of professionals and people who are concerned about the future. We have children, grandchildren, and so on. And we want to take a responsible societal approach to what we're doing. I think it's really important to understand that there never was a Renaissance man or woman. It's a lie. Because a Renaissance person, as we talk about them, like there's somebody who could do everything. They knew everything, they'd read every book, they were all this sort of stuff. And so let me just point out to you, if there really was a Renaissance man or woman, by that definition, why did Michelangelo need the Medici? Why didn't he do his own banking? Because he was a Renaissance man. He needed somebody with a completely different skill set. Donatello was just a workman in a studio. The Medici saw him, said, hey, you're really good. We're going to set you up. You needed that whole other infrastructure. And I'll give you better. You live in Salzburg. Okay? So what if Leopold didn't have a piano? And of course, his son, Wolfgang Amadeus, could have been the best sausage maker in Salzburg. And then you say, where did the piano come from? Oh, you needed a whole ecosystem to build pianos. Oh, but by the way, he wasn't using a piano. He was using a forte piano. Oh, and by the way, he was beta testing. That's what he was. He was a beta tester trying to take the transition from the harpsichord, the clavichord, to the pianoforte. And by the way, he got that skill from his father, who was beta testing from the Baroque violin to the Gesangsviolin. And there's this whole culture of the tradesmen who make the instruments, the luthiers, who could not play those instruments, and yet understood the respect of the performers and the people that did this. This is a perfect example. Oh, by the way, how did he and Gernot go on tour when they were 7 years old all around Europe? How did they get there? How did they book the concerts? Where did they play? Where were the concert halls? Where did the audience come? All of that. Oh, by the way, where did the orchestra musicians learn? You needed a conservatorium. Oh, you needed concert halls. Oh, by the way, how did they fund it? Well, you needed the Archbishop of Salzburg to fund it, right? There's this entire ecosystem to create that culture, which has been one of the richest cultures that comes from where you work and live. And that's, if we want to think about the types of things, and by the way, almost everything I said there comes in the title of the ministry, in some sense, about mobility, about ecosystem, environment, transportation, all those things fit into it right there historically. And so we have an existence proof. If we just think differently, and we have to design the ecosystem and where we want to go and the culture that we want based on our values, and how do we go about making that happen in a way. And so now I'll answer your question, is that in my work around telepresence and working together, the fundamental part is it's not about the technology. It's about how you support, almost like as an artificial leg, as a prosthetic, or glasses that augment my ability to see because I can't read without my glasses. How do we, that every technology we make, think of it as a prosthesis, for that helps me expand my capabilities. And so the first thing, when I talked about stepping stones, is how do I get there from here? And the best way to do that is to show respect for the hard-won skills. And when I say skills, I mean the motor sensory skills, the cognitive skills, and the social cultural skills that people have already acquired from a lifetime of living in the everyday world. And how can I reflect and build on those so that we have a smooth evolution even when we're going to a different world? And what I see is with technology, and especially a lot of the video conferencing technologies, is it's like somebody just snapped your neck and took you into a different place, and it feels foreign, and it completely inhibits, and I feel uncomfortable, like in clothes that don't fit. when I'm trying to work on technology and work with that way. And that's what's wrong. But as soon as we look at this from the ecosystem, how do people work? What's important? How can we make the technology disappear? And when I started using the word telepresence back in the early 1980s for this thing, the point here is, how can I really establish a sense of presence? And not just that I can see, like you right now, I'll say, so for you, Manfred, you're like maybe half a meter away from me, and you're in my office right now, and we're close and we're looking face to face. And so you physically have a presence relative to me, but you have no presence whatsoever relative to the things around there. You don't know what I just wrote down here. You don't know that I have a screen there, and if I was going to have a document that we're going to share, that it's up there. And so it has to be a sense of presence that encompasses every artifact that's referenceable or relevant to our conversation. And that depends on the nature of the conversation and how many people and so on, just like you choose your office versus a conference room versus an auditorium or versus a soccer field where you meet. But we have to be able to accommodate all that. So this is a really long way around of saying my introduction to, say, desktop video conferencing, and the types of things that led to this. First of all, they came from the arts. And second of all, from that, there were two folks at Xerox PARC who were sort of my teachers, mentors, who introduced me to this. And it's very, very important that they were both architects. And I don't mean computer architects. They were building architects. And almost everybody else in the industry, in terms of formal video conferencing, were from telecommunications. They viewed it like an extension of the telephone. Now, the architects, they said, no, no, no. Remember what I said about glasses and artificial legs and prosthetics? They had the attitude is, no, this is actually, in today's language, augmented reality. We are going to augment physical architecture so that we can extend it into another place, so that we truly have a sense of presence. And I don't mean avatars or robots or virtual reality. I just mean so that when I look here, you know, because the same material that's to my right is in that direction, and my gaze will take you there and you'll know what I'm looking at. And if there's three other people in the room, if I look at them, you will know who I'm looking at, and they will know who I'm looking at. And while you're speaking, if I look over there while you're speaking, you know that I'm for example, looking at Michael just to see his reaction to what you're saying. All of those things. I'm much different if you see me here, where I can gesture and you get my body, as opposed to a talking head. And so you lose all of those physical gestures about whether I'm anxious and so on. All of those things are really important. And it becomes even more important when I realize there was an architect named Louis Kahn, who's, again, one of my heroes. And he had this great expression: thoughts exchanged by one and another mean different things in one place than in another. But there's a different moral order that's determined by context, where you are, physical, social, cultural context. And those things have to be reflected. And we choose where we go in different spaces depending on the type of purpose that we came together. And technologies don't reflect that. We use the same thing for everything. It's sort of like if you had one car and you had to use it to transport bricks, but also take your family, or to go off snow, in the snow. It's just, we have multiple vehicles. We specialize these technologies, and the question is, how do I transition from one place to another? So the whole thing, I'll give you one example, or two examples. The first thing, what I hate about, because we were doing, by 1990, or 91 to certainly by 94, but between 87 to 94, we were so far ahead of what the technology delivers today that it's unbelievable. And that shows what I mean about this. There's a 30-year lag between when we do things and when they actually are manifest. And because we are so impressed by our own ability to reinvent things, we don't take advantage of what's already been done. We're not good historians, which is why we need historians as part of the Renaissance team. So if we have this, where we can have people move around and work in a way which builds upon their existing skills, the technology disappears. And it doesn't mean it goes away. It's just transparent. And then we're coming into the principles that Mark Weiser talked about when he talked about ubiquitous computing. And so I'll give you a gift. I'll teach you a new word. It's a real word, and it's in the Oxford English Dictionary. And since everybody probably in the audience knows the term ubiquitous computing, and by the way, Mark Weiser was a really close friend. I worked closely with him. I worked with him in those early days of where we evolved to ubiquitous computing. I designed some of the devices that were part of that thing, like the PARC, so the PARC tab and so on. So he used the wrong word. Ubiquitous means basically it's everywhere. Everything's everywhere all the time for everybody type of thing. When we come to architectural thinking, it's about place, space, and the relationships within it, and mobility within that from place to place. You don't want everything everywhere. You want the right thing at the right place, at the right time, for the right person, for the right purpose, in the right relationship. And it turns out there's a word maybe 2 centimeters away in the condensed Oxford English Dictionary, the one with the small print, from ubiquity, and it's called ubiety, U-B-I-E-T-Y. And ubiety, instead of saying everything everywhere, it has this really strong notion of place and the importance of place. And so the problems, instead of having a ton of more gadgets stacking up, making things ever more complex, if we design our place, the digital space, in accordance with our notions and skills of social and human space, and don't try to make everything work for everybody all the time, everywhere, but we can adjust, then all of those things about place and what sociologists call the moral order of place, that is, the behaviors are well understood. You don't talk on your cell phone in the orchestra level of the Vienna Opera House while you're watching an opera. You could do it, it'll work, but you'll get kicked out. It's the same thing. That's an extreme example. But we need to think about how we design our technologies, taking into account and also anticipating and help design so the affordances of the design encourage the appropriate behavior. And therefore, the obvious becomes obvious. That's a long answer. It wasn't specific, but I could tell you specifics about examples in terms of what we actually built. So, for example, with Teams or with Zoom or any of these things, there's no opportunity to grab somebody at the end of the meeting as you're going out to discuss that Buxton guy, man, I think he was off his rocker. This was nonsense he was saying, or to say this part was really good. This part I questioned. I want to find out more about that. There's no opportunity. You're here, you're gone. We have to make these things analog, that they have smooth transitions, and where those opportunities to go from the big meeting to big cluster to move out. We need to have ways so there's anterooms in the beginning. So just like we had today, we had a really nice conversation beforehand, just like we would in a normal conference room. But there was no way for the other people to see who else was there and go into subclusters and have multiple conversations going on and things like that. How would you do that? And because that's where, if the meeting was a good meeting, it's going to generate ideas, and people are then going to self-organize on the way out and then make plans for other things seamlessly. They can still do that, but it is a whole other class of transactions that comes at a much higher cost in terms of time, thinking, skill sets, and scheduling. I don't need to schedule a thing. It's an instantaneous meeting there. And we have to understand those roles. We have to understand that something like 75% of all meeting time is 2 people. We have to know that if we take 3 people, that constitutes 93% of all meetings time. We have to understand that if you have more than 8 or 12 people, it's not a working meeting. And so you have to specify that's another canonical set. We have to understand if it goes up to 20 or 40, it's an information sharing meeting where most of the people are able to participate, but more in terms of asking questions and one-on-one. But and all of these need to be structured differently. And if the software, just by looking at the number of attendants, knows that, oh, this by just the number of attendees, that this is going to be this class, it can just assume the appropriate defaults instead of just giving you this and you have to go through all these things. You take away all these things and now it's seamless. And now you just move naturally into the space and reduce complexity. And then I guess the only other thing I'd say about all of this is we have to make it inclusive so that we don't extend the digital divide, so that those who have all the technology benefit and those who are economically, geographically, or physically in terms of where they live or educationally disadvantaged, that they're left out. And those all come together, and that's way too much. So I should stop, and you can ask your next question. I'll give you a shorter answer.
No, not an issue. Not an issue. In terms of, I hear me myself. Sorry. I just have to. I hear myself now. That's an interesting voice I have coming in. Anyway, in terms of one follow-up in terms of divide and education. So in the COVID situation, and as we have now, there's enormously a lot of distance education in schools and all that more or less rely on this type of technology, which is a good thing to have, some possibility of distance teaching, whatever distance teaching mean on one hand, which gives the possibility to do quite a bit, but there's a divide coming up here, as you just mentioned. So I think in particular in this contextual issues of schools, learning situations and so on, I assume there's quite a lot of much more divide coming in terms of the different social settings and different contextual settings. So everybody's using the same tool more or less for totally different purposes, as you mentioned, or even for distance location and education settings and all that type of things. So it's even another issue which gives some viewpoints on that. So it's still not well done, I would assume.
So I just have to say to anybody in the audience, we didn't rehearse this. So
No,
this is not a setup, but this is why I love working with you, because I couldn't, if I was having to author the questions, I would have, I couldn't have written a better question at this point. So the first thing is, you don't have to be so kind and polite. When you say people and all of these things are using the same technologies, let's call it what it really is. No, all those people are being abused by those same technologies. In terms of it's abusing their ability to fluently make use of the skills that they really have, for example, in education. And I would say there's a wonderful thing about COVID. I mean, it's a lot of terrible things, right? But there's this old saying, I think it exists in German too, that things have to get worse before they in order to make them better. Because you need to have your face rubbed in the mud before you come up and say, no, I don't like this. Okay, now what am I going to do about it? There has to be a silver lining. And the silver lining is first. Almost everybody who's an information worker in the privileged place of being able to work continuously from home or remotely has experienced the weaknesses of the tools. But then we have children who are homeschooling, or a spouse who's also having to work remotely. And we realize my house is completely not capable of handling this. The bandwidth isn't there. I don't have enough computers. And there's just not enough room for everybody to work independently without interference. And, oh, and by the way, I can just tell you the numbers I don't know in Europe, but I can tell you that in the United States, that you will find that 30 to 40% of homes are not equipped with sufficient broadband or physical infrastructure or the rooms or the computers to actually have one person working, much less two. And all of our senses of what was required for bandwidth have gone out the window. We've learned that. And that's the bad thing. This was all knowable in advance, but there was no forcing function for us to do anything about it because other things took priority. We've now had our face rubbed in the mud, and we've realized, I want to say this, for some of us who have kids, or even just think about when you were or we were in school, how do you teach long division, just 25 divided by 3? How do you teach that to an elementary school child without a blackboard or a pencil where you can lean over and show them and so on? In math, how do you teach a theorem without actually demonstration, watching, having kids demonstrate to the class and moving back and forth? And now here's the big question. How many of us today, if we hung up right now, in 10 minutes, could be hooked up to somebody else in this meeting and show the other and do a sample of showing somebody how to do long division? I've got a Surface Studio in front of here. I've got a Surface Go there. They all take pens. They all have touch. They fold down. And I'm sorry, none of our school teachers were equipped to know how to do this. None of this was taken seriously. And here's the part. This is serious things. Okay, long division, who cares? Kids will learn it, everything. No, every part of the transaction of showing a kid how to do long division with a whiteboard, being able to watch their face and have the other kids see, and then have them even be able to come in and say, here, does anybody know how to do the next step? Okay, you do it, Manfred. No, that's just what you do. And that's what we can't do. Oh, and by the way, that's what you and I would be doing if we were doing a circuit diagram together. It's what we would be doing if we were trying to do a layout for a floor plan for our new laboratory. Those transactions are generic, and these are just different instances. But we are crawling like a baby, not walking, and certainly not running like an Olympic athlete. And we should be running like an Olympic athlete at this point. But we've lost our way because we think the person-to-person space, just my ability to talk to you. Listen, I'm amazed. I cannot believe that I can get quad HD video for $25 a month delivered to me at the cabin north of my lake in Toronto, where I am right now, be talking to you, have good audio, great video. But there's tons of things I cannot do that I need to do. And that's where we need to start to pay attention. And I want to make it very clear, our experience right now with COVID, working at home, be very, very clear, is not what's going to happen next. It's a very unusual, unique case because every node in the geographically distributed social network only has one person. And each one has one person on a screen. And that means we all appear to each other more or less equally included, but also equally inhibited and restricted in what we can do and how fast and at what cost. When you get to a hybrid, when you've got rooms with multiple people, and you're the single individual dangling into that and participating, all of a sudden, you have about the social presence of a fly on the wall as an observer, and almost no possibility to fully partake or be included in the conversation, much less move seamlessly from being the fly in the wall in the audience to the front to now take a presentation. And that notion of being able to move within this space and not just to occupy any one place in that situation is fundamental. It's not about the set pieces, it's the transitions, it's the movement. And it has to be analog, it can't be switching. It's just like exiting and coming. It should be analog. We move out slowly, we come in slowly. That gives us the opportunity to make social transactions and to subdivide. And the same thing within, I need to be able to move within a remote room when there's multiple people and be seen and see, to have put my hand up instead of using this stupid hand on the screen that you forget to take down. I never forget to take my hand down when I've asked a question. I know how to do that, but you can't see it because you can't see me, right? So you see the point? You're laughing because it's so obvious and it's so simple to fix the minute you do that. It's the same thing, you know, we can go on and on about it, but those are the things that are really, really important. And all the examples I'm giving, without giving a literal example, I'm trying to point out the absurdities. Enjoy, leverage what we have right now, but do not assume that what we've learned working individually in this configuration is just going to transfer seamlessly. We can go on our merry way. We're going to be slapped down really quickly. We already know that. And then the question is, if I'm connecting, this is what I work on right now, and that I'm obsessive about this, is that how if I just have, this is a small version of Surface. It's a Surface Go. It's about the size of an iPad, except it actually works, so it's a real computer. If I have that, and I'm coming into your fancy conference room this full-on thing, how can I be a full participant? Because that's all I can afford. Maybe it's because I'm a business person, I'm in an airport lounge, or maybe it's because I'm in an economically unserviced area, and that's all I have. And if I'm the teacher, how can I use that and still teach the whole class? And we can do that. And in a way, what's really great about this is that much of the insights for me have come from the arts and not from necessarily from science and research. And it comes from people with skill sets that are different than mine. And so again, here's the most important takeaway for those of us who come from an engineering or scientific, technological background. We have been wonderfully trained in problem solving. Our huge part of our identity and our pride and our self-professional esteem comes from our ability to solve hard problems. And what we have had way too little attention paid to in our education is the question of problem setting. We do brilliant jobs at solving the problem, which might be the wrong problem, as opposed to finding the best solution to the problem. And so that notion of what is worth doing, what's the right hierarchy, and how do we address what, and the first thing you have to do, and this is where design comes in, I'm not going to make a decision on any design, any approach, until I have at least 5 meaningfully distinct solutions and be able to articulate what distinctions make them different. And then I can start to make comparisons. And usually I won't take any of the 5. The conversation around those 5 will take me to another solution. And this is a classic design thinking and how we work, but why there must be multiples. Don't ever, ever, ever take the problem as initially stated as the problem. It's a symptom. It's not the problem. And now, like a doctor, you have to then ask the right questions to get a proper diagnosis before you can start to be prescriptive and not take that assumption. That's the biggest mistake we've made in technology. We go the inertia, and because we're overworked and we're pushing too hard, we don't step back and try to see things in the ecological, environmental, and the cultural framing and the long term, that everything we work on is sustainable and has an evolutionary path going forward that is useful. And in this, from a philosophical and a way of thinking, this came very shortly after Darwin wrote his book, The Evolution of the Species, was they started to use evolution not just for biological, like for the animal kingdom and the vegetable kingdom, but to the technological kingdom. And then came something very, very interesting. The notion of the distinction between technological evolution versus technological progress. Evolution is a technological concept. Progress is an ethical concept. It's a question of ethics. And so one of the things is how we use language, ubiety, I don't, and telepresence. What does presence mean? Instead of talking about communication technologies, think about trustification technologies. How do we establish trust and confidence? But in this case, make that distinction and call people out on it in a meeting. Say, when they say progress or evolution, do you mean evolution or progress? Just ask that question. And it provokes this question of what's the difference? And it's a reminder. And now I'm going full circle. This is my musician coming back from an ABA structure. I'm right back to Kranzberg's first law. It's not good, it's not bad, but nor is it neutral. And so now you figured out. It comes back to every question being an ethical one, especially if we're after progress rather than evolution or versus economics.
In terms of what you said, that's probably also the danger that the distancing, as we started a bit to discuss that, with these hybrid situations, it gets even more worse because of the situation we are facing in the future. So that based on the non-preparedness of technology, that the distancing or the distancing aspect, which will get more worse as it was before COVID. So we don't learn the right things.
So it's interesting. Again, it's how we think about things. We still talk about television sets, and we still think about what are the resources we actually have. And also, I think what's really important for us to recognize anything we start working on today, it's probably going to take at least 5 years, assuming that we've already got 15 years of history to build on. If we're starting from scratch, it's going to take 20 to 30 years. Let's be clear. Capacitive multi-touch on the iPhone, everybody thinks, oh, 2007, fantastic. No. My group was doing that in 1984. Publicly, it's published in 1984. Maybe 85, but we were, and the mouse. This is my favorite, by the way. There's a guy, Herr Malbrine, who lives on the Bodensee. He used to be an engineer at Telefunken. And in 1968, he invented the mouse, as we know it. He built the first mouse that had a ball mechanism and that had shaft encoders and that really worked, and was selling it within weeks of when Engelbart in California, who quote unquote invented the mouse. It was a terrible mouse. It was had shaft encoders. It hardly worked at all. It wasn't produced in 1968. Within the same time, Telefunken was selling it. Something that would work just as well today as it did then, whereas nobody would use this thing that Engelbart was showing in California. Now, I'm not questioning the creativity of any either. I'm just pointing out historically. In 75, Xerox PARC patented a design which is identical to what Telefunken was shipping in 68. They got patented in the United States in 75 because nobody knew about it. It was there in plain sight. Nobody did the homework. If it didn't happen around Silicon Valley, around Boston, or something like that, it obviously didn't exist, because how could anybody else be so clever as us to do this? There's this arrogance. And there's some history there, and I've interviewed him. If you want, I'll give you his phone number. He's still alive. And it's fascinating. And it took me a long time to learn about it, but it's really important to understand that the solutions are there if we look for them. And we have to become excellent prospectors. And then we can start to move things forward, because if you knew about that, you just cut 5 years off of that 15 years. And so the question here, if you have this long nose of innovation that takes 20 years for something on average to go from beginning to maturity, where maturity is $1 billion industry, one of the greatest things you can do is change your process instead of your products and your framing so that you can shorten a nose from 20 years to 15. You've done a huge difference. You're on the market years before everybody else. And the problem is, and this comes back to what this ministry is about when we talk about the environment, including the technological environment and the human and social environment, is we have to understand no matter how brilliant our idea is, every idea is dependent on other ideas. And if we do not design ecosystems where the thing can actually reach its plane, it play to its strengths, it's a great idea, but it's too early. The mouse took from 1968, when everybody knew about it, to 1995, when Windows 95 came out, before everybody had a mouse, even though Microsoft sold a mouse before Apple did in 1982. I used my first mouse in 1971. The Macintosh in 84 made it popular, but they only got 8% market share ever. And the problem was everything was built on DOS, and none of the programmers knew how to write graphical user interfaces. There were no tools. There were no bitmap displays. There was all these other technologies that had to happen before you could all of a sudden have a widely all-around graphical user interface. And by the way, all the people on businesses that were built on DOS had to convert all of their work practices within industry. I mean, it's the same idea. So why do we have the same keyboard? Well, because there's so much invested in the skills of typewriting that doesn't matter if you make a faster keyboard. You'd have to change everything. It's not worth it. It's a bad investment. And so but when we understand and can do that ecological analysis and track all the trends of the other things that are happening, we can really leverage it. So let me give you an example. When I started and shipped my first large screen device, it was in 2000, and it was a 55-inch. So let's say a meter, 1.7 meters or something like that, wide, a diagonal screen, plasma panel with a touch screen, has gestures and touch and that stuff like that. That screen, a large screen TV, like all of us have in our homes probably today, cost $20,000 US. And now you can buy one for 200. It's not the screen that changed. It's not what it could do that changed. I mean, there's other things it can do. It was the price point. Now, if we start to realize, think the following question. Negroponte at one point said, imagine what happens when bandwidth is free. And everybody thought he was insane. Because he said, because then everything we do with landlines is going to go to wireless, and everything that's wireless is going to go to landlines. It's this funny inversion. And he was right. It's one of the few things that I actually really respect him for. But the same thing's here. What happens when screen real estate is free? What happens where every place in your office or your home even that you have a whiteboard or a corkboard or a calendar, you can have a display that's non-intrusive, that doesn't put your heating bill or electrical bills up, and it's as cheap per square meter as a whiteboard. So what happens if I don't have to put everything through a little tiny screen, and if I can afford a television, maybe I could even just have my laptop or my iPad or my phone interact with my TV and just have it seamlessly be able to, so I can do homework, help the kids, and work on the front of it. Why do I have to change the idea of a digital whiteboard that I can work on with a pen from my television? And if we can start to modify how we think about these devices, we have so many gadgets that we're killing ourselves with complexity. The biggest challenge we have technologically going forward is not some new gadget that is a killer app or a killer device. It's that nothing works together. And so no matter how great any single gadget is and how simple they are to use and how cheap they are, collectively, they're way beyond the threshold of human comprehension. It's just like you have with the 5 remote controls you have with your TV set right now and your music system. You know how to use every one of them. Nobody knows how to work the stereo or the TV. And I have 4 doctorates. I don't know how. And I designed this stuff. So I'm just saying, those are the things of integration that you need to change the ecosystem. And so we talk about social computing. And what we mean is technology-mediated human-human socialization. What I've talked about so far, when I talk about the person space, but also the task space, the whiteboard for the teaching the kid math, I need to say, I need the social networks of documents and that. But I also need the society of technologies, the society of devices, need to have social relationships, that they know about each other, the approach, departure, all of these things that we use in sociology. And sociology gives us the language to talk about things like kinship. I'll give you an example. You'll like this one. I have a Ford Escape, that's the name of my car. And I have a mobile phone. I pair my mobile phone to my car. And so when I get in it, I don't kill people because I don't ever look at my phone and I don't ever put my fingers on the phone. Very interesting. 100% of the interaction language of that phone changed. 90% of the technology of that phone is not used when I'm in my car. The speakers, the microphone, some of the language processing is in the car. The address book's in the car. When I'm in the middle of talking to you in my car, I get out with my phone and I just keep on talking. Despite the fact, that's a miracle, it's fantastic. 90% of the technology changes, 100% of the interaction language changes, and I don't notice because the only thing that matters is the consistency of the conversation, that the phone behaves and adapts to the context. That's ubiety. But watch this. I rent the same car, exact same make, model, year. I get in it. First, when I get in, I find your address book and all of your information left in the car from when you rented it before me, and you don't know it's there. And I'm now and I need to be able to have eyes free and hands free when I'm renting the car. But I'm afraid because the engineer says, hey, you can pair your phone, great. No, it's a social, that's an engineering relationship. I want the social relationship of trust and kinship. The negotiation when I come into a car with my phone should be, is this your car, Bill? Is this the one we know? No, they know each other. Don't pair your phone, introduce your phone to your car and establish a social relationship. And when you get in another car, no matter where, rental car, that it knows, hey, this is a stranger. I'm going to be guarded in what I share with you. I need your microphone and speaker. I need to be able to have this relationship with you, but you're not going to put a damn thing in my phone, in me, this is the phone talking, and the car says, well, you're not going to put a damn thing in my car. And by the way, when you turn the car back in because of the information system, everything's going to be erased no matter what. Nobody thinks that way because we think of gadgets and then we use bubble gum to put them together. And these are the things. And so when we talk about collaborative work, I need to be able to bring whatever I've got with me, the work, whether it's on paper or whatever, and I need to be able to bring it into the conversation as seamlessly as possible. It's about absorbing and desorbing and bring things to the work. And so the question isn't about how do I do remote work? The real question is, how do I work? What do I need? What are the social relationships? What are the artifacts? What are our interactions with all of these things? And how do I establish a sense of awareness? And in some cases, doing it remotely is better than doing it in place. And so that's one of the nice games to play to test designs. It's not, how do I reproduce paper when I do pen computing? It's say, where does paper suck and where can I do better than paper, but different? And then I know when to use paper and when to not, and maybe how I integrate paper, but both are going to inform each other. And I don't have to do a bad and do terrible job of paper and just disappoint people, but give them something to highlight that they couldn't do before. So that, right? Those are the things that how we work together, learn together, teach together, and then how do we do that in a way that scales so that the people that have invested and have the resources, they can make full use of what they have, but they do not leave anybody else behind, even if they have far less equipment to go there. And that's a prime accessibility issue. And by the way, that includes people who can't see, people who can't hear, people who have limited movement. And so, but I clump this remote work as just as important in terms of the collaborative work problem as I do about these other aspects of accessibility. And then the other part is economic accessibility and just physical. And if we think those things through, and we have people on the Renaissance team that have expertise in all of these different disciplines, and we work together with no egos, and but full on respect, but a common ground in terms of literacy of each other's disciplines, but not expertise, then by our design of our culture, our working culture, and our value systems, our universities and our research teams, we can just advance way faster. And it's all about figuring out what the values are and what the real problems are. It's problem setting, not the problem solving. I don't have any interest in making video conferencing better. It's already outstanding. I don't need to do it. It's a waste of my time, and it sucks because it's an island that's missing all of its arms. It's a great brain with no arms, legs, or feet, or eye. You know, it's whatever analogy you want. It's great, but it's not. It's essential, but not sufficient. Now we ask what's missing, and how do we make things work together?
I think it's a good point. Thank you, Bill. Good point to open the discussion. So if somebody wants to raise a question, have some opinion about things, so we not just do a dialogue between Bill and myself. So let me know by the chat if you want to raise something or to ask something or bring something in or have something against it, whatever you want to mention.
Yeah. And I promise to give short answers. I know how to do that. I get carried away. I obviously hate my job.
So somebody has to make the ice-breaking person.
Yeah.
Michael.
Okay. I saw this coming, Manfred. Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Bill. It was great to listen to you. And it's hard to put a question because it was so nice to listen to you. Emerging in the way you see you were reflecting on all those topics. I have some really very good takeaways from what you've said. One of those is that we have a new definition, a kind of new definition of what our pop-up hub is about. It's about the effort to make problem setting with people who are problem solvers. So I really appreciated this very interesting point that we are definitely we are somehow catched in this rationality of means and try to find ways to get to a rationality of goals. And well, just one question or an invitation to reflect a little bit more on this. You were talking a lot of parts were addressing on these telepresence topics. And in fact, what stumbled me in the last year with respect to those tools is on the one side, you find in all the media, well, this is a great breakthrough for digital technologies. Everybody's using them, so they saved us. At the same time, more and more we find out how ridiculous weak those tools are, how very few things they have understood about human interaction, human communication. You mentioned some of this, the gestures and so on. I also think about eye contact, for example. It's a very important issue in conversation, seeing people into these eyes. And with those tools, I have no idea where you are looking to. My question is the following: why do you think? I mean, very concrete on these telepresence tools. Do you think a kind of do you see a kind of industrial movement? They say, well, okay, we have Microsoft Teams, we have Zoom, and now we find out after 1 year how incredibly weak they are. This would be quite a concrete question that I have.
Yeah. I had the CEO of a company called Silicon Graphics, SGI. I used to be chief scientist there. And I was complaining to him about how bad things were. And I was kind of whining. And he said, Bill, your job is to be frustrated. If you're not frustrated, you're not doing your job. And if you can't handle it, get a different job. And so my sense, and what I hear from you too, is I'm amazed by what has been done. Don't get me wrong. Thank God we have Teams or Zoom and things like that right now, because it's better than nothing. And think about if we didn't have them. But I'm not sort of saying, those companies or our company is a bunch of buffoons doing things. It's just that we have to always proceed as if we know we can do better and be pushing all the time. We have to, even if it's manufactured, we have to have this frustration because it sets the ambition, but it also gives a sense of urgency. But this is where COVID is a valuable thing. Now, so if we are like prospectors and we really are looking and figure out how to look for gold or uranium or whatever and build Geiger counters for whatever we're trying to mine, and then learn the techniques of mining that, we can actually bring this stuff forward. It relates to something. I'm going to try and put this up if you can see it. I think so.
All right.
It's sort of it's just a T. Anyhow, it's just a big T. So somebody has this question that relates to this. It says, is technological literacy a deciding factor, or is it just a public approach holding us back, not wanting to bet on the wrong horse? And so my answer is, if we think about the Renaissance team, technology is essential, it's not sufficient. Social science is essential, it's not sufficient. The design is essential, it's not sufficient. Business acumen, essential, not sufficient, etc. It goes on. So now, if you think, people talk about T-shaped people, like a big capital T. The bar across the T, that shows, and that dimension is expertise, and that's breadth. I have a T bar across here that's that deep. That's what's literacy, and it goes way over here. But the expertise is just very narrow. And the reason is, and this is something the composer Yanis Xenakis said to me that where this shape from is, I was complaining because I was having trouble balancing being a technologist and a musician at the same time. And he just said to me, but Bill, why are you complaining? It's a full-time job to be really good at one thing. And you're complaining because you're not in two? Basically, shut up and say you're lucky. But so the point is this, that the problems we deal with need depth. Depth is necessarily narrow. It's an artifact, it's a full-time job. It's really hard to become world-class at anything. And these are really deep problems that need very serious, highly educated people. But by definition, by being human, you can't be the Renaissance person. But if we make sure that we cultivate a breadth of literacy, then when I have this T and this T bar here, they overlap, and the bases line up like so. So I've doubled the breadth without losing depth, and I get from here, the overlap here, I get the common ground, where we have mutual respect, mutual understanding about what you do, how you do it, and I defer to you because you're the chief financial officer and I'm the chief scientist, and we understand what each other's do, but neither of us could do the other person's job. And you build that circle where you have the whole group. And so in every problem, this is exactly what I did with my research group at Microsoft Research about 3 years ago. My closest colleague and we sat down and said, what's the most important problem? Okay, we found that we blended that. I said, do we have the skill sets in our group to even do this? The answer was obviously no. Well, then who knows what don't we know? And then who's the expert that we can, bring in? And all we try to build our groups and the projects around that process. A couple key people, you start working that out and you figure it out. And then you make sure you understand what each other does. And it's respect. And then you defer. And now you realize it's a social construct, and get rid completely of this idea of invention. That if we look at the history of technology, nobody ever invented anything. What they did is they found somebody's shoulders to stand on, and then, if they were successful, their shoulders became worthy to be stood on others. I can give you a wonderful example of one of the greatest inventions that came out of Austria that you may or may not know. And I'm going to get the dates wrong because I haven't read this, but I have written about it. Do you know liquid crystals were invented in Austria by an Austrian? And the person was basically studying carrot juice. Yes, the juice from a carrot, because he was interested in chlorophyll. And when he was messing around in this study, and he was working at a university in Hungary at the moment, what's now Hungary, he discovered, wow, there's 4 states, not 3. There's, besides the liquid, solid, and gaseous state, there were 2 liquid states. As you change the temperature, the liquid became transparent or opaque. No idea what the hell's going on. We're in the 1800s, around the 1860s, if I remember correctly. There's a mineralogist, he asked, who's Hungarian. What the hell's going on here? He said, it's probably something to do with crystals. And they said, well, wow, that's interesting. Who knows about crystals? So they said, well, this guy in Erlangen, in German, and he had a special microscope that had a heat controller, so you could actually control the temperature of what you're looking on the microscope. Within something like 3 months, they figured out and identified and done the full chemistry of what is on every screen every one of us is looking at, liquid crystals. Now that knowledge got lost because they were too early. But the ecosystem wasn't ready to, because if you had said, this is going to be huge, people are going to have them on their wrists, they're going to be on the walls, they're going to be everywhere, you would have been locked up in an insane asylum. But then Americans reinvented it. And of course they invented it. Well, no, nonsense. They finally found out that they were 100 years sort of late in the game, but they actually, it was a time where it could be done. But the main point was 3 universities, 3 different disciplines, and the important part here, the breakthrough innovation was an unintended consequence of somebody doing something that they were passionate about, as opposed to managed research. Nobody said, go invent liquid crystals. And these historical things have a huge impact on me in terms of how I manage research and how I think about it. But I love having these local examples that come right back. And I'm curious how many people here who have a background in science know that story or that history. I hope, and the ones who do, correct me all the parts I got wrong. But I can give you the books and the names and the dates. But the important thing here is, but these are really interesting things, because these are things that at the educational level, beginning, don't be American and think everybody needs to be a hero. Mozart was a fluke. He's an accident. But he could never have happened if there wasn't an orchestra, if there wasn't a music school, if there weren't concert halls, if there weren't instrument builders. But they were not put in place to create a Mozart. Just like it was made for the Buxtehudes and Salieri's and the people who were okay, but they're that. But unless you actually nurtured the full system, it's like in Canada, the minor hockey leagues, if you're going to get a Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky could have been the best sausage maker in Florida if he lived there, because he would never have had an ice rink. So the point is this: these are things where they're deep cultural things, and they begin really early in life. And how we set up our education system and how we think about science. And we don't think about science and humanities as separate, but mutually dependent. And in fact, this is the great thing about your ministry. Our whole survival depends on that, understanding the holistic interrelationships and cultivating that and making sure we use every bit of expertise and channel it into these really important, deep problems. And that's why I've been trying to avoid specifics and trying to get the organizational principles of thinking and how to approach in what I've been saying, because I don't, everything I can say, I can give you the science, but that's not the important thing. That you can read in the book.
Okay.
I don't know, Bill, if you see the question which came in the meantime. So I think from Michael Behine, it's about, in short, I think it's about having enough money to do research, and how to come get across about that, as I understand it in terms of the question.
I have written about that, and Manfred, I can give you some things, but there's some essays on my website, my papers. One's called the Folly of Research Funding in Canada. There's a Business Week article I wrote about the importance of doing basic research. And it plays upon part of what I just said with that issue of the LCDs, and it's how that a lot of the major breakthroughs come as a result of pursuing something else. They're unintended consequences. And so these are my personal feelings. I'm not expressing Microsoft's feelings, but I'll tell you why I'm at Microsoft. There are very few corporations or companies that actually do support basic research. And furthermore, there's too many universities where the only way they can fund the research is by taking on corporate research contracts. My personal ethics and belief system is, when I was chief scientist and had control at SGI and at Alias, I refused to do contracts with universities. I found universities that were doing interesting things, and I said, here, you're doing good work. Here's some money to help you. No strings attached. Just keep me informed of what you're doing, because I do not want to divert you from your research. I want to enable you. No NDAs, no patents are allowed. And at Microsoft, I've been at universities where I'm trying to give $14 million on a project to stimulate work in an area that's interesting. And they refused the money because we insisted that they not patent and that the work is out at least in the public. And I think things like that that's a rare occurrence, but we really have to realize that it's important for universities and research labs to, if they're funded by the government, they're servicing the society as a whole because they're paid by the public. And how do we build things up? It's the reason we support music schools, it's art schools, and I think research is the same way. And the longitudinal studies that I have read in economics show that when you try to manage research along a certain path, in general, productivity goes down because you think you know where you're going, and you're going to be measured successfully in terms of getting there. Whereas in research, unencumbered, this curiosity driven. Now, there's basic research, short-term and long-term. It just means that on this long nose of research, that you distribute your investments like any other investment portfolio along the different phases, and you have a balanced portfolio. But right now, the tip of the nose is too often being cut off. And so it's sort of in farming, you say you're planting your seed corn. So you've got nothing next year to plant. And you've got to be always harvesting seed corn for 3 seasons down. It's really important how all of these things affect how things work. Because here's the question. You have really good universities. You're graduating brilliant PhD researchers. Where do they go to use those incredibly expensive skills that the country has put a huge amount of money in, because the universities can't absorb them all? And so cultivating companies and organizations where they can do basic research and not become over-educated technicians is really important. And so at Alias, Manfred, you know that, is that I took 1% of revenue of the company and I had a research lab, and that's what they did. And that company grew, and its success was based on that. You do not have to be Microsoft to have a proper, respectable research group. And the people who I hired, they had to publish in the peer-reviewed literature at a level that would get them tenure at Stanford or MIT or the University of Toronto. And it doesn't mean you have a huge group, but if you know your industry, that percentage of investment is small, but it's possible for a smaller company to do that. It's a company with maybe, let's say $100 million gross revenue could afford that. A peer research group of 4 people. And I'm just thinking that those models are, most people don't believe they're possible. And one of the reasons I left Xerox PARC, where everybody wanted to go, the temple, to a startup sized company, was to prove that by doing it. And I left after 8 years. And 10 years later, there were 8 people when I left, and it grew to something like 40 as the company grew. And there were mergers and so on and so forth. But it's really important to understand that many of the things we take as truths are myths. And I don't know who started them, but it's fake news. And we should start stepping back and saying, use our creativity in terms of things like that. Where do all the brilliant talent from Austria go after they finish their PhD? And how do you bring the best talent from someplace else to come? And this is, again, Ubiety. It's all about place. How do you make this place more attractive? And that's how it comes. And you don't have to know what the results are going to be. You just say, I put these people together. It's like a bunch of musicians. And if I get the right musicians and I choose them for attitude, skills, and that, I don't care what the music comes out. In fact, I want to be surprised. And the Fraunhofer has done that somewhat. The ETH in Switzerland has over periods done things like that. There's good examples, and I think there's ways to do this, but getting out of the silos of technology independent from the humanities and business and politics is not good.
So there, I think Peter Burgerthofer has another comment. At least I saw it. Hi, Peter.
Yeah. Okay. So very briefly, by the way, I love the overeducated technician metaphor. That's beautiful. I'm going to use that with your permission. So you said in the very beginning, if I remember correctly, that every technological decision is an ethical decision. And I really like that. But we also said we're terrible at this. So now people like you have been saying for 30 years that we are terrible at this. Why are we still terrible at this? Why hasn't computer science understood how important HCI is and human-centered technology and human-centered design is and funded that part of itself? So just one more sentence. We're experiencing, I'm at this HCI group at Eindhoven, and we experience this constant defunding, this trickle defunding over the years. Why is there not more money in that part of informatics, of computer science?
So I can give you a few reasons why I believe, but of course, I would be a genius if I actually knew the answer and could give you a clear answer. The situation exists because we're human, and our organizations are run by humans, and we're subject to all of the human foibles and weaknesses of ambition, greed, lack of risk taking, and so on and so forth. And we're impatient. And in some sense, technology makes us impatient. We expect results really quickly. In terms of government and policy, in my country, in the States, basically politicians have terms of 4 years. They need to show that their investments have given results within 2 years, when I'm telling you that investments in research take 20 years. How do we find bipartisan or multi-partisan policies which are independent of partisan politics, but which really realize this is a long-term investment? But if we start now, there'll be annual returns on that investment. But from what I started today, it's going to take at least 5 to 8 years. I think risk is really, and fear are really important. And again, I'll come back to Austria and the Alps and my love for mountains and mountaineering. Here's the thing. For many people who've never been in a winter climate, to walk across a skating rink or a frozen lake is taking their lives in their hands. They might slip and fall and crack their head. If you've got ice skates and you're used to it, it's no problem. And then I go to the other side. So what if I turn the ice 90 degrees and it's vertical? And yet I think for any of you that are physically fit, you are my friends. Within 3 days, if you've had a little bit of rope training, I could have you climbing a vertical waterfall. Not a vertical one, but a steep waterfall. But you need, well, how can you do that? Because it would be suicide if you tried it. If you can't walk across flat ice, what are you going to do on a vertical or near vertical ice? So let's do a really quick analysis. This is how I think about how to approach this. What do you need to eliminate danger and turn it into manageable and acceptable risk? You need the right skills. So what are those skills? Figure that out for the danger you're going to come in. You need the right tools. So what are the right tools for that? Those two things both take creativity. But you also need the right fitness. It doesn't matter if you have the tools and you have the right expertise. Are you fit? Are you going to die halfway up by exhaustion? Did you go into training? Example, you're not going to do a $1 billion merger if you haven't done a $10 million merger. You start and you build up your skills. So have you got the skills? Do you have the fitness because you've trained and do that? And the most important is, do you have the right partners? I don't care if all those other three are there. When I go into the backcountry on my skis and I'm going to climb the mountain, I'm going to ski down, I don't go out with anybody that I haven't done avalanche training with and I really, really trust. And I've seen how they behave when you go through drills. And even with my friends who are mountain guides, we do that every time when we first go out on a trip. The first morning is spent doing those things to build that trust. You need trust, you need skills, you need fitness, and you need the tools. Then you can start to take on what other people would think is suicide, and you can do that with risk. But the creativity that's required as a culture, as a group, or as an individual is exercising full creativity and design process in how you make the decisions on each of those four things and how those four things merge together. And I think there's lovely examples that show how that can work. And even in terms of the investment in the arts in Austria, you can see what the benefits are in terms of the richness it's brought to the culture. Just as long as we recognize that if culture is that important, every technological decision we make is in fact a cultural decision. I have all of these technologies are cultural artifacts. They shape our lives. They shape how we work, just as music does, just as painting does, just as landscape, architecture, everything. And when we take those values and we apply the same level of thinking and how we review them and talk about them, then we start to change the culture. My advice to people who are academics and experts, respected experts, is write 2 less scientific articles a year and write 4 articles in the public press in layperson's terms that are understandable, helping to build collective literacy, because nobody's going to vote and support politicians and give them the support they want and need to make change if they don't know what you're talking about. We have to bridge the gap between literacy, not just amongst scientists in terms of different branches of science, but between the population that actually, let's face it, pay our salaries. And if we're working at a university and the shareholders who are going to make that consideration when they're investing in companies. and startups. And so these are the things, it's like, how do you think holistically? For anything to happen, it's remember the mouse story from having started at Telefunken in 68. To be successful, you need a perfect wave of all of these things coming together at the right time. And we need to, and that's where you step back and do the analysis of, sorry, so what are the trends? How do they work? What's going to happen? When's it going to happen? So you can choose your timing and your solution to match what's going to come together at the point where you want to launch and introduce this new thing. And that's a very important part of strategic thinking. And again, just how we do that. Margaret Mead has this great saying, right? Never doubt that a small group of determined individuals can change a society. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And what all we need to do as a community is together make a mutual decision as to what we need to do, and we get and how to approach it, and then not wait for some politician, some academic, or some business person to bring it to us. Take ownership. The only thing that changes culture is ourselves. We are our culture. And if we don't like it, then we change it. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. And then we're empowered and we're not victims. And we're gonna, and it's like playing ice hockey. You're gonna get knocked onto the boards, you're gonna get knocked down on the ice, but you're gonna come up with a smile because you love the game, because it's a really important thing to you that feeds your soul. And that's how we have to approach science and technology and policy. And it's a full-on contact sport, and it's really exciting. And I'm evidence. I'm 72. I've lost my hair, but I've still got my soul. Right?
So I think this is a really great, more or less a little bit of a connecting statement what you did, Bill, now, connecting to our next discussion, I would say. I would think more or less we are more or less at the end of the time. I don't see any pressing issues. So I think the last statement is the first statement for the next discussion we have, probably. It's quite a very great thing. I think I have to thank you very much. I thank all of you of being here and participating and listening, and thank you for giving you our thoughts. It's definitely provoking us and reaching to the next discussions we have. I think it's our ownership in terms of change we have to do. Yeah, it's definitely the case. Yeah.
So Manfred, just thank you, and Michelle, thank you for asking me. And I have this huge affinity to your country and to society because of what it's given me, and it's had a huge part in shaping me. So it is an honor, but also really a privilege to be able to give whatever I have back to reflect what grew from my experience there too. So it's a pleasure, and if I can help going forward, ask.